Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, villagers. My name is Ben Casnocha, co-founder and partner here at Village Global, and we're excited to have with us today Eynat Guez, the CEO of Papaya Global. She's an incredible unicorn CEO. She's an LP at Village Global, and she's a fantastic member of the broader Village community. Today, we're going to talk about the founding story of Papaya, lessons learned, how to accelerate sales processes, how she signed her early customers, founder mode, and lots more. So, Eynat, great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Sure, happy to be here, finally.
Indeed. So, Eynat, let's start by just level setting on the founding story of Papaya Global. So, tell us about that initial moment of inspiration and walk us through kind of the initial product vision, and then maybe spend 30 seconds and just tell us about the current state of the business in terms of revenue scale and customers and all that.
Sure. So Papaya is a global workforce management platform. We are processing employment, payroll, and payment for multinational companies globally. We co-founded the company 7 years ago. We've been growing quite substantially since then, raised $440 million to date in 4 funding round. And we'll talk about that because I think it's always important. I mean, like headlines is nice, but eventually there is always a story, and eventually kind of every dollar there has a story. So we'll touch more details about that later on. We are about 900 people currently, spread across 10 locations, serving a multinational organization, mid-market to enterprise, Fortune 500 clients. We really went up market this year, and we'll speak about that as well today. I think it's an important topic about kind of who you serve and what type of companies you need to serve and how this is impacting your DNA internally. Going back to kind of Papaya's start and kind of beginning of the journey. So I started my journey as on the services side. I had 2 services company prior to Papaya, a bootstrap company, service company. So it means that I needed to assure that I can eventually make them profitable on very, very early stages, because otherwise I would need to kind of use my savings. And both of them were on the same domain. I had a relocation company, global inbound and outbound corporate relocation services. And then we added the employment kind of global employment EOR company services. And a few years later, I started another business when everyone was kind of eyeing to China and expanding into China pre-COVID, and had a company that helped global kind of US and global companies to expand into the continent, mainly to China, and then into other kind of region. And those was actually kind of a great fun businesses, profitable, kind of great journey and so on. But I always wanted to do something on the product side, and I didn't want to be the product, let's say it this way, because when you are kind of running a business, in the majority of the cases, kind of the founder is also the product and is the main kind of expert. And I actually didn't knew how I transform my knowledge into a startup. So I was browsing through tons of ideas from flowers shops, like instant flower delivery, to dog kind of accessories, and a few others I can give you a name.
You're touching on all the key human needs: flowers, dogs,
Yeah,
solving real problems.
exactly. Um, and always had like an idea, got super excited about it. 2 days later, I was like, okay, it's not that great, and so on. And actually, when I was kind of browsing through ideas, that was actually the rise of the HR tech, payroll tech companies in the US, great companies, kind of the year of Rippling and not Rippling, sorry, Zenefits and Namely and other companies that started to rise on the domain of HR tech and payroll that is related to US. And I was really intrigued because I never thought that this is actually can transform to be a product. But I said, okay, if the need is there for the US only, it's definitely there for the global. And this is where I took everything that I knew actually on the global side, and we started to kind of envision Papaya.
So, and let me just jump in, because that's thank you for that background. And now you started the company. We have on this podcast live on the call today, we have lots of enterprise founders who are seeking to close their first 10 or so enterprise clients. And they're where you are. They are today where you were at the beginning of Papaya. Zero brand recognition, limited resources. So how did you close those first 10 or 15 enterprise clients, what unconventional tactics help you overcome the resistance of, especially the customer segment you were selling into, probably slow moving adopters? What was the key to unlock those initial sales?
Yeah, so I'll give two examples, okay? Because I think that generally speaking, in some cases, it's easy to get to kind of the prospecting line, right? I mean, it's easy to get like initial call, initial meetings. I mean, you are bringing tech innovation to the table and so on. But then there are kind of few aspects that you need to understand. First, if you're in the maturity level that you'll be able to meet their expectation. And second, eventually, what will make them kind of choose you, although you are a very, very small startup. And on the very early stage of Papaya, we won an RFP that was for a publicly traded company, a global kind of business. I remember we worked so hard on this, and all of my investors constantly told me, listen, I mean, you're not going to win this. I mean, don't be kind of disappointed. And when we kind of got invited to meet them, I mean, they were like, yeah, go to the meeting. It's a great experience, but, hold your expectations and so on. And we won this business. And the reason that we won, and we asked them, how come that, I mean, you chose us, I mean, you can kind of tell big stories, but eventually people knows that you are a small company and so on. And they told us because you were able to solve a problem in terms of the data kind of visualization and helping us to have better kind of control. And no one else could do that in this way. And I think that the way to win this is actually find this unique kind of thing that you can solve. It's not going to be about price, okay? It's actually probably not going to be about price. I think if you're gonna try to be kind of the most there is an echo here, but if you're gonna try to be the most cost effective provider, you're probably gonna lose. And you really need to find kind of one sweet spot that will get you in, and they will eventually understand that can be a great, great, great place for you to kind of to support and innovate something that this is a pain for them.
So in other words, and have you read Crossing the Chasm, Jeffrey Moore's book?
No.
You know this? Yeah, the argument is like, how do you, as a startup, how do you sort of like convince mainstream customers to adopt a product when they don't identify as like an early adopter? And it's basically find a beachhead and then expand from there. So for you, you found some niche problem in the organization that you could be better at solving than all of the larger competitors, and you leverage that initial success to expand within the customer base. Is that right?
That's correct. And by the way, I mean, as you go to big enterprise, sometimes this is not the most complicated or sophisticated tech problem that you're actually solving. Sometimes it's a very small thing that you don't even consider it as a big thing, but this is what they need. For us, it was like data visualization, literally kind of a dashboard, a BI dashboard that will show them everything that happens, not in the lag of 2 months, because this is what happens currently on a real-time basis. And that was the game changer for them. And I would give another example of an RFP that we actually got very, very close to the final line, but then we got the MSA to review. And I mean, it was very clear that we need to sign it as is. Payment terms was, I think, net plus 180. We needed to give them like monster insurance policies that would cost us about like $500,000 a year. And we really wanted the logo. But eventually we said, okay, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we can't meet those obligations. There were tons of other obligations there that it was very, very, very hard for us to meet. But I would say that first, energy and enthusiasm wins, okay? And the founder mode, which I know that we're going to speak about, also wins, because a lot of our companies at this stage will send to this meeting like, a salesperson, which is okay, is great, might be a great salesperson. If you're coming with an executive team and you're stepping into the room, you are much more committed, and the clients appreciate this. And a client understand that maybe you are much smaller, but he understand that he's going to get much more attention. And I think you need to work with this kind of enthusiasm. And when I advise friends or small startups, and they tell me that they don't meet clients, or they send like the sales kind of team because they don't want kind of to get into the meeting too early. I said, this is a mistake. I mean, it's not about getting to the meeting too early. Everybody's happy to get attention. And I don't think that you don't need to be all over the place. You don't need to respond to every email, but you need to be present. They need to know that you care about this deal. They need to know that they're going to be your key clients and you're going to do everything for their success. And
Yep.
from my perspective, this is very important.
And just one thought on that, and then Laura Crabtree, I know you're on. If you we can take yourself off mute in a minute to ask a question about how to accelerate sales processes. But just as a nuance, uh, I think some startups, when their competitors are deploying their like, a senior account executive, they can feel self-conscious about the CEO showing up constantly. And there's some customers that are like, wait, does the fact that I'm getting all this CEO level attention actually reinforce how small and insignificant this company is? And so I know when I was a founder, I sometimes was thinking about how do I actually have other people on the team show up to customers so that we don't seem so small.
I
How do
agree. And
you
as
how do
I
you balance
said,
that?
you don't need to answer to any email, okay, to every email. You don't need the first one to jump on every call, but you need to be present. You need to kind of come to weekly meetings or eventually on the sales process and say, I know my team did a great job. I want to be involved. I want to add this and this added value. So it's not about doing everything. That's definitely not the right approach, but it's really about showing them that you care about this kind of opportunity so much that you know everything that happens, that you're in the background, that you're actually constantly getting updated. So yeah, it's definitely not being like on everything and kind of sourcing everything and so on.
Yeah.
Don't, I
Okay,
mean, we
great.
need
And,
some
and
focus. Yeah.
fantastic. And Laura, do you want to introduce yourself and then also ask about accelerating sales?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Laura. I'm CEO of Epsilon 3, and we build software to accelerate integration, test, and operations for complex engineering, namely for launch and spacecraft operations are some of those things that we do. So we are starting to explore, we have 100 customers through enterprise all the way through 10-person companies. And I guess what we're looking at is, do we hedge our bets and go after more enterprise customers? And if so, how do we look at the sales process? Because it's been all over the place. It's been 3 months, it's been 9 months, it's been a year. And we really need to figure out a way to standardize it. And, secondarily, we have a lot of weird legal, since we work in the ITAR space a lot. We have a lot of weird legal things. Did you ever run into any of that where you had to negotiate hard on legal terms, which I always find very strange?
Yeah, so there are a few questions here. I will start with the sales process because this is very important, and I think everyone fails on it. And eventually, the ability to evaluate if those are real deals and your sales actually is sales team is actually kind of filling the pipeline with great logos and tell you, yeah, it's a long sales process, but those kind of customers does not exist, or they're not really engaged. So I think that you need to understand what's the sales kind of process and how it looks for you and where are the touch points. But you need also to keep a very, very strong kind of, I would say, honesty level with yourself, that if this sales process is not being met, I mean, eventually, if you kind of define that after the first call or the second call and sending a price proposal, you want to ensure that somebody spoke with the clients in the period of 2 weeks. If the client is not engaged, if you're giving him like a quarterly promotion and so on, and he's not engaged, not interested. So honestly, it's a ghosted deal, okay? I mean, I think that the worst thing that we all do is being over optimistic and keeping those kind of great logos and prospects and kind of handing them over quarter after quarter. Sometimes, I mean, a seller maybe he believes, maybe he just want to keep kind of his pipeline kind of quite attractive, but it's actually, it will impact your ability to prospect and eventually kind of to get to a great projection at the end of the year. So at early stage, before you understand kind of the flow and you have enough people on ground, you really need to assure that you feel you have very, very good kind of understanding. When was the last touch point? I mean, why eventually it hasn't been signed? What is the client timeline? And sometimes it's great to try and hop on a call with the client and try to explain and try to understand what is the timeline and what will make it kind of what's the dependency of this timeline. Okay, so we really need.
And just because I think it's such a really provocative point, so just to amplify it or underscore it. So what I heard you say is a common mistake that many of us make, many of us on this Zoom, is we're over optimistic about the true stage of a prospect, We had a portfolio co-founder of a company called WageStream in the UK, who said that unless you're actively texting with your prospect, they're not close to closing. And so if you've just been on email and you haven't moved to text, don't delude yourself. They're not going to close anytime soon.
Like that.
I'm curious, do either of you, I mean, Laura, Eynat, do you have any other like heuristics for how, like, what's the tell that a prospect is actually far along or that they're leaning out? You know, can you rely upon, for example, simply non-responsiveness? Because there's lots of big companies that will ghost you. It doesn't mean they're not interested. It just means you're not a priority. You shouldn't give up just because you get ghosted 2 or 3 times, right?
No, I go with like 7 or 8 times. And most people are like, oh, I'm so sorry. I've been so busy. Thank you for emailing me again. But for like the leaning in portion, I think you're right about texting. You know, I asked my salesperson the same thing, you know, when was the last time you talked to this person? He's like, oh, I texted them yesterday. And I said, okay, well, that person's still active. But there's a couple that he's like, oh, well, they told me that they were going to come back and sign because, you know, we send out the PO and we say, you know, you have to sign within the week. And if they didn't sign, he's like, oh, let me make another one. I'm like, actually, I think that's done. Okay. If they want it, they'll come back and say they want it.
Got it. So, and any thoughts from you, Eynat, on just like heuristics for how you know a prospect's actually for real?
Yeah, I think, you know, in our business, and I think every business should have like his own kind of understanding here. I mean, details matters. So if a prospect is not asking question, okay, I mean, about like on a country level, on how, I mean, if we don't hear that he's already thinking how he's going to implement this, and by the questions, he's not only, asking questions about how much it's going to cost, right? Because this is very high level. He's not kind of diving into the details. He's not bringing more people to kind of the table. He's not kind of having like active discussions with others. I mean, from our business, by the way, we know that if someone is not sending us through kind of a sending us security questionnaire and we don't get kind of IT kind of speaking with our team, it's not a real deal. I mean, we are dealing with personal information. So, you know, I mean, no one is eventually signing something that the CISO kind of office did not sign, did not eventually approve. So, I mean, this is a really, really good signal. Maybe they are using us for counter offers. Maybe it's not a top of mind for them, but you need to understand kind of what are the things that matters in your industry and eventually what's the decision-making process. By the way, I could say that it's a bit similar to fundraising, right? Because every single time that I went out of a meeting with investors, I said, yeah, this was amazing, and so on. And sometimes people tell you, yeah, I'm super busy, you know, I'm going to a vacation, and so on. I'll talk to you like next quarter. I mean, it took me 3 years to understand that it means that they're not interested currently, okay? So, I mean, when someone wants to invest, they find the time, they find kind of the thing. So if eventually kind of defining kind of a timeline, defining what is the process, assuring that this is very structured. We implemented Medic in kind of the sales kind of team, which is a very structured process, and it helps you to understand kind of the staging and so on. And I think it's also helped us to get better staging.
Say, and say the name. What framework did you implement?
Medic.
Medic. Okay.
MEDICC. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a great framework. I mean, there are some others, but I mean, eventually assuring that we all understand what is the staging, that we speak the same language, they understand the same things, and so on. And again, promotions always works. Now, I would say that it doesn't get much easier when you grow, because when you go up market, then motion is that everybody wants to sign at the last week of the quarter. Now, this is a nightmare because eventually somebody told me this, and he said, you'll see that you are really kind of an enterprise kind of led company when you're going to get to the last 2 weeks of the quarter and almost your kind of actual kind of contracted will be zero, and all of a sudden you're going to meet kind of the quota of the quarter. I said, no, I don't want this, but this is actually what happens currently. So you also need to understand what is the motion. You also need to understand what are the incentives. And I think finding your champion and understanding if bringing them specific incentive will actually kind of help them to take better decisions or quicker decision, it's very, very important.
Yeah, and I'll come to Simak in a sec if you want to be ready to come off mute to ask your question. But Eynat, just one thought that I've had in our own process of fundraising and pitching is I don't think there's any shame in asking the person explicitly, so how interested are you? Like, or what do you think we're trending to the right place here? Like, just sort of checking in with a very explicit conversation, because I think you're right, especially VCs that always want to preserve option value to maybe invest at a later round or not have a bad reputation in the market. They'll always grin and smile and say, great to meet you. So unless you are explicitly asking the VC, or I would argue customer prospects, hey, I just want to check in, kind of real talk, or we appreciate your candor. Where are we trending on this conversation? How likely do you think it is that we get to the finish line here? It's much harder for customers or VCs to evade that kind of explicit question.
I agree. But this should also be asked by kind of a phone call, which actually I think that, a lot of people are avoiding kind of calling people, and eventually, the best kind of relationship, if you can meet them for sure, but texting is nice. Eventually, if you are picking up the phone and just calling somebody, people are sometimes so surprised, and it's currently not very common to call people that are actually much more responsive, and eventually kind of you can get much more on a phone call than anything else.
Okay, so we'll go to questions. And a reminder, folks, if you want to put your question in the chat, feel free, and I might call on you to come on and ask it live. But Simak, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Simak Baharlu, I'm co-founder, CEO of Lab Vivo. We provide a platform for procurement and supply chain management of biopharma companies. By definition, we work with big logos and big companies, and saying no is really, really difficult, especially when you're faced with the opportunity, but you bravely said no. So in a deal that you were faced and you realized that it wasn't really, it was actually going to put the company in a difficult position. So I was really interested to understand about the process, whether there was a process, and then when you pulled that trigger, what would it be at the beginning, evaluating the opportunity, or when you see, the challenges or the risk that brings the company, you pull the trigger and say, no, this is not something we want to do. And then how you make sure your team is also aligned and they understand why you make that decision. And the second part of the question, in retrospect, what is your view on those decisions? Do you think you made the right decision walking away from some of those bigger deals or bigger logos at the earlier stage of the company's journey? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start from the end. I always make the right decisions, even if I'm wrong, because that was the right decision to the time, okay? And even if it was a mistake, eventually, I think it was the right, there was eventually consequences that led me to take this decision, and maybe I learned from it afterwards, and this is great, but that was really the right decision for the time. And I think this is important because honestly, I'm wrong like 10,000 million times a day. So, even being wrong is sometimes the right decision or the right place for you to be, because this is actually help you to get to the second stage. I think that you can learn a lot from talking to a client on the sales process. Okay, so even if you know that you will not be able to meet their needs and it's way too early, and this is look at this as a discovery process, look at it on a learning process, look at it of hearing what is it that they need, because two things can happen. Sometimes, as I said, you can find a very, very niche thing, okay? For us, I'll give an example. We are currently working on two product lines, payment and payroll, okay? Sometimes we don't want to do a payroll deal because we don't think that we're going to be the right partner, but I say to the team, we already have the contracts. We know where their payroll is. Tell them, we know that we didn't ask about payment, but we have a very unique kind of workforce payment solution. Let's talk about this part. So you're actually cross-selling to someone, because they approached you, it means that they are willing to talk to you and so on. Let's try to bring their attention to where you want to be, not necessarily where they brought you. I think you need to assure that you are not getting into a place where you're wasting their time, or you are eventually selling them things along the way that you won't be able to deliver, and eventually ruining kind of, future relationship, okay? Because everything is a future relationship. It's a very, very small world. And we are currently, implementing clients that we spoke 3-4 years ago, and it was too early for them to take the decision. They wanted to see kind of how we grow and so on. And this is okay. But I think that transparency and being very candid about if you can do something or not really matters. I mean, now, if you know that you can deliver this until you're going to go live because they move slowly, this is okay. I mean, you'll be able to deliver this, but don't get into anything or don't promise anything that eventually when you're going to sign, I mean, if they're going to choose you, you're going to say, sorry, I can't really deliver this. I mean, and so on, because that's just going to frustrate everyone. And eventually, probably they're going to walk out. So, I mean, you need to be very careful here. And I think the last thing is that eventually, as founders, we always want to sell. We always want to grow the business, right? But again, and it's very similar to kind of investment kind of terms and so on. Sometimes you want to take money from investors, but the terms just doesn't make any sense. And you say, okay, I want the funding. I don't want those terms. It's almost the same with clients. If legal is just super aggressive and you can't kind of make those things, it's a huge risk to the company, okay? Kind of getting into agreement that you cannot commit to meet behind it. I mean, it can be a really, really, really kind of deadly kind of decisions for the company. So you need to assure that you are not signing anything that eventually will put you in risk. Again, for us, I mean, I've been browsing around kind of trying to convince them and then convince kind of insurance brokers to cover us in a way that will make sense. It was so expensive, and it was just for this single deal that I said, okay, I can make it happen. And eventually kind of, this is not the right stage for the company and so on. This is bringing more risk and more liability than any kind of benefit.
I think I think just connecting this, Eynat, to your point earlier about why it's so important to have a realistic view of your pipeline. So much, I think, of the question around whether to take on a customer that's not perfectly aligned with your roadmap depends on your options, right? Is there a lot of revenue elsewhere that you can rely upon, right? And if you have few options, of course, you're going to do some extraordinary things, inclusive of going outside of your strategic roadmap to close revenue. And so having clarity on real pipeline probabilities, I think, is just your earlier point, is so key to this question, because we have startups in our portfolio that do turn down lots of bad revenue in pursuit of good revenue because they have good revenue to go obtain. I think in this AI moment, it's very interesting because there's a lot of bad revenue in these AI companies where they scale very quickly to like 400, 500, 600K ARR, but it's not sticky. It's not repeatable. It's really unclear, like, how many other customers there are like this. It's kind of random and opportunistic. And then founders say, I have $1 million of ARR. I'm ready to raise my Series A. It's like, no. These days, VCs really are distinguishing between good and bad revenue, especially in these AI companies.
Yeah, totally agree. And I would say another thing about kind of pipeline projection, that we are very busy in signing the deal, which is very important. But you also need to assure, and this is great about kind of going up market and enterprise, because you know that the sales cycle is going to be longer and so on. But currently, we are starting to hire for Q2 kind of needs, because I know that currently I have a very strong kind of confidence in the pipeline and things that we're going to be closing and things that we're going to be onboarding. I need to assure that the team is ready. And this is actually something that took us a while to get to a maturity where we can plan ahead and not finding ourselves in too short cycles where we are bringing great clients in, but then we don't have enough team members to support them. And then eventually kind of we are losing on the experience because it takes us a while to ramp up the team. And this is a tough exercise because you really need to kind of plan ahead. But I think that when you are getting into this motion, I mean, things are actually, I mean, after the first or second cycle, it's becoming much, much easier to plan. It's becoming much easier to retain. Everything kind of gets into the place.
Yeah, and so let's talk about so many of our companies are frustrated at the pace of adoption inside their customers. They're like, if I could only accelerate, well, certainly the sales process on the front end, and then even the adoption and implementation process. And you've done some clever things over the years at Papaya. I was reading about how you created a 4-week onboarding program to sort of accelerate how your customer is adopted when they usually take months or years to implement a system like yours. What kind of generalizable tips or advice do you offer early stage founders on how they can accelerate both the sales process as well as the implementation of their products?
So I would divide it in two, okay? First, you need to, I mean, you cannot change things. I mean, just because you want to change them or because you are frustrated about them, okay? So
You
some
mean
of it you
hope is not a strategy?
I mean, going to a client and tell him, I need you to move faster is not a strategy and it's not going to help. And anyhow, I mean, sometimes we just need to accept the phase, okay? And sales, I think, I mean, it is what it is. And we see it. Sometimes we kind of try to give them great promotion for kind of expediting things. And they tell us, listen, I mean, we want a promotion. We can't move faster. I mean, we have a process. Legal takes time, kind of security takes time, and so on. So this is the process. So just find the areas where you can eventually control the phase and bring better value. I think for us, and this is a very big thing in our industry, we are getting RFPs for huge clients, and the onboarding plan is for 5 to 7 years. Now, I tell the team, I mean, I don't believe in 5 to 7 years kind of commitments and onboarding because honestly, people will change, we will change, things will happen. I mean, I've never seen one kind of client that was committed and fully kind of completed 5 years kind of implementation plan. So let's understand that we bring the max, but this is the client, this is the RFP that they set in place. So I cannot tell them, listen, this is not going to happen, you know, I mean, let's change it. But instead, we can create kind of sophisticated kind of model and push a lot of the value to the first kind of year. As you said, I mean, what we said is let's implement kind of the software first, because then you're going to get a lot of value from an ROI from the software side. And then we're going to go through your phase. But it actually requires kind of assuring that you can take the heavy lifting on you. Because if you want great or quick wins, you need to take the heavy lifting. When we step into the organization, we take the heavy lifting of data that, I mean, you know, probably 10 years from now, we would tell them, bring somebody, I mean, sort this out, bring a third party, I mean, assure that this and this and this looks like this, and then we will step in. This is the prerequisite. Currently, we do that because we know that we want to accelerate this. And we are actually developing tools to help them to expedite this thing and to understand that when you have a lot of stakeholders around the table, I mean, it can be internal, it can be external as well. I mean, you have integrator, implementer, and so on. You need to assure that you are making everyone's life easier, because otherwise you are losing them and you're losing the momentum, and that they become champion quickly as possible. And this is a hard task because we are still investing a lot of time there in order to assure that we can always bring this and assure that we bring them the immediate value first, or the biggest value kind of in the very early stage, so we kind of motivate them to continue on the processes that are less fun, because implementing software is on large organization is never fun.
There's a study that I saw some years ago, and we can put as much stock in, you know, psychology studies as people want, given some of what we've learned about psychology studies the last few years. But it was basically the conclusion was that including the word because in an attempt at a statement that's trying to influence somebody increases compliance. So we're very attentive to, well, I just need to know the reason for why you're asking for that thing, right? And so the word because is very powerful. And there was even one of the amusing parts of the study is like there's even cases where people in an attempt to influence would basically restate in the second half of the sentence what they said in the first, like, I need you to go get lunch for me because it's important for you to go get lunch for me. You know, it would increase compliance relative to I just needed to get lunch.
Yeah.
And I think for startups, when it comes to urgency, I love your line. I mean, I was lolling, and yet at the, you know, telling a client I need you to move faster is not a strategy. But I wonder if we could brainstorm things to say after the word because. So for example, you know, we really need you, like, we need this implementation to be wrapped up by the end of February, because in March, we're working on another new client project that's going to consume most of our team's attention. Yeah. And we won't be able to deliver the service you expect, or something like that. Like, give some reason for urgency that's not just naked self-interest that we all want to move faster.
Yeah, but I think, again, you need to look at this from the client perspective and not because you don't have the team member, the team, and eventually you're going to be busy. I mean, for us, for example, I mean, we always tell them, if you're going to move faster in the first quarter of the year, you're going to have a better outcome in terms of tax years and in terms of data accuracy and so on. So it's actually going to make the whole year much, much, much easier for you. So find a timeline that is actually kind of removing burden from his desk, not the one that's saying, okay, that's going to be better for my kind of resource optimization. Again, I mean, generally speaking, we always need to think what is it for them, not what is it for us. I mean, from their perspective, okay, I mean, if I'm your client, give me the most of the attention. I don't care if you have resources or not. I mean, I want to get the most of the attention. So we need to find the logical and kind of the things that really make sense and that will make them better champions, that will actually impact them to move faster, because it will bring them value that they can tell to the organization. At the year end, for example, I have better reports because I implemented Papaya earlier. I can do things much, much quicker. I did a major cost saving because I actually implemented something, quicker. Those are the things to rely
Yeah,
on.
no, that makes sense. That's great. Just pivoting to fundraising, you raised over $400 million in the Papaya journey so far from VCs. If you had to go back in time, what would you tell your younger self about how to work with VCs, how to raise money from the most helpful investors?
Wow. So first 3 years, we raised less than $3 million. I can kind of count every dollar and how hard was it. And basically, I think that we received kind of more than 1,000 no's. So it was a very, very tough kind of period. And I mean, when we raised our Series A, we had like $7 million in ARR. I didn't realize at the time how I think it's standard. I thought it's standard because we grew we didn't have any other choice, just growing in order to have the ability to kind of fundraise. I think over time, I learned two things. First, I can tell the story, and this is great, but I think one of the investors that actually did not invest in us, but is still a good friend, told me once. He said, a founder and an investor, they meet over a PowerPoint. If everything is great, they will meet for an Excel, and then the word is coming, right? Because this is kind of PowerPoint, business plan, and term sheet. So you need to assure that eventually you also can play on those multiple kind of aspects. Okay,
Hold on, just make sure you say you meet with a PowerPoint, then date number 2 is Excel, and date number 3 is a Word document. Yeah, I like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Microsoft will be very, very proud.
Exactly. So, and then you move to text. Okay. But generally
and then
speaking,
Microsoft Teams to have the ongoing relationship.
Exactly. Sponsored by Microsoft. I think we can, you can kind of send them the bill. So generally speaking, I think that you need to assure that you can meet all of those kind of aspects. Okay. I'm really good in PowerPoint. I'm not the strongest in Excel sheets because I can understand the things and so on. This is where you need to understand that eventually you have a very good stories at all level and that you are very, very confident at all level. I think, as you said before about like clients, for me, I have tons of investors that didn't invested in me, and many of them were candid enough to give me feedback. And one of them is actually every time that I went to the Bay Area, I went meeting him. He's a great guy. And he was always telling me, you did well, but you're not phenomenal. And I was like, why? Give me like, what the phenomenal kind of founders did that I didn't. And he gave me so many advices that, I could hear them on a negative way of, oh, he's arrogant and so on. But from the other hand, he actually helped me to be better, and he helped me to get to a place where I can raise funds much, much better because I know how to improve myself. So I think that now I know tons of things that I didn't know when
So like, what was an example of a thing that he or someone else told you that you improved about yourself when pitching VCs?
So, for example, he was like, I asked him why I didn't do phenomenal. I said, okay, because eventually, if you know that you can bring like 10 clients and you still have the money to invest more in marketing or in sales and you are not doing it, so it means that you could bring 20, but you decided that eventually your limit is 10, so it's not phenomenal because you didn't stretch the limits. And I think that there is a point here. I mean, I think that eventually it's all about stretching the limits, right? Making the impossible and eventually kind of breaking kind of the limits of everything that you do. And this is really kind of the zone that investors need to get from you. Because if they think that this is, I mean, it's definitely not a lifestyle business. It's not kind of a nice to have hobby that you have. And they need to feel it in everything that you do. And they need to understand that you can eventually kind of lead this. So I think the few things that I would tell myself is first kind of learn much earlier kind of where to work out from a relationship with investor and understand that this is going nowhere. Define timeline very, very clearly. If somebody is telling you, if you are, I mean, I think that what I did very well in series B, C, and D is when we started talking with investors, I told them, listen, I'm going to raise funds in the next 2 months. This is a timeline that I want you to meet. If you have the time, this is great. Let's continue. If you cannot commit to this timeline, I mean, this is perfectly fine. Let's talk in the next round. And sometimes, you know, they were like, I will try and so on, which is okay. Sometimes it was very, very, very blur. And I realized that, I mean, you know, there is no strong commitment there. So, I mean, it's a waste of time. It's 50-50. I don't want to be there. So it's not a good investment of my time.
Yeah, and actually, just to jump in, because I think that's a really interesting point on fundraising. We certainly hear from founders sometimes that present an explicit timeline at the beginning of their fundraise process. They say, we're doing first meetings this week. We're asking for diligence the following week, and then the week after that, we want term sheets. And it's a very strong move, right? Because it conveys confidence. Of course, the problem is if the round's taking a long time and you come back and say, hey, actually, the timeline shifted, you look much weaker. So it's high risk, high reward, I think, to lead with a timeline on the fundraise. However, what I'm noticing actually in this advice, which I think is really interesting, I hadn't thought about before, and it connects to like maybe the central takeaway from this conversation so far, which is see the world clearly about the likelihood of prospects closing and investors closing. Don't delude yourself with over optimism. But like, I think there actually is something to, if a founder talks to an investor and lays out a timeline, and the investor immediately backpedals and says, oh, I'm not sure we could ever meet that timeline, you've just basically qualified them out of your pipeline.
That's correct.
So like, it's actually a fantastic lead qualification technique with investors.
I agree.
And then if you lack full confidence in the round process, you could actually articulate the timeline to do lead qualification, and then maybe soften the timeline a little bit, sandbag it a bit to give yourself like 6 to 8 weeks to get it done instead of 3 weeks. But I just think talking about timeline is a great way to disqualify VCs.
I agree. And I don't think that the timeline needs to be that aggressive. I think 3 weeks is not really respectful and so on. But I think that eventually kind of setting like 6 to 8 weeks process and say, this is the timeline. I mean, this is what I want to do. If I'm not going to fundraise this quarter, I mean, next quarter is super busy for me. It's not going to happen. Maybe, I mean, I'm going to, kind of postpone this and so on. Obviously, I mean, you might get weaker. I mean, eventually if people will say, okay, what happened? But you also kind of hear the reaction. Now, I would say that generally speaking, I'm a relationship builder. I think that I'm spending tons of time speaking with investors, even if I know that they're not going to invest. Not necessarily sharing with them all of the information, but I think that the fact that people knows you and the fact that people knows your company and what you are doing actually always kind of plays off, okay? And on early stages, I got tons of intros to companies, to great companies from investors that did not invested in me, because I think that, people generally wants to help. And if they understand what you're doing and you've been kind enough to spend time with them, and this means that you not necessarily, you don't need to speak with only partners, okay? I have great relationship with kind of the associates of the firms and so on. And I find them like being a great sourcer for you. So if you respect people and you actually kind of not try to bypass them, you actually can transform them into an amazing source. And they speak with companies all day long. They want to please. So they always exchange data. In a way, this is their day-to-day. They need to exchange data. So if you give them valuable data about yourself, they might exchange it with someone else and so on. And this is a win-win.
Yes.
So try to be I mean, I don't like the approach of I'm only speaking with partners, I'm only speaking with this, I don't have time. No, I'm speaking with quite a lot of like associates. And I think this is very important. You can
Yeah.
decide what type of information you are handing over, but be
Yes.
respectful.
And we're gonna, because we're gonna shift topics in a sec, but I just, strong +1 on don't disrespect junior people at firms. I think that's one of the most persistently bad pieces of advice that happens on VC Twitter, which is like, it's a waste of time you're talking to junior people. It's definitely not a waste of time. It's weird that that advice is propagated as far as it has, in my opinion. And then I think the second point, which is like another key takeaway from this conversation, and because you've said it in many different ways throughout this conversation, is life's long and everything is a future relationship. That's a kind of beautiful phrase, and it applies to customers. It applies to VCs, not just because the VC or customer might close in a future interaction, but people move around in their careers, right? The person at a company they're selling to today might move to a different company that's a better suited prospect, or the VC who passes at their current firm might go to a different firm someday and be a fit for a later stage round. So you never know. So playing that long game, I think, is such great advice. I want to just pivot back a little bit to sales, and we're going to bring Sammy on to ask his question, and then we're going to wrap up with founder mode discussion. But Sammy, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Eynat, for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Forethought. We offer an AI platform for customer
Yeah,
success.
actually, you are just selling to my team currently. So good
Yes,
luck
I
with
know that. And I think we're doing a free trial in January. So we're very excited for that.
I mean, it's a real prospect, so it's okay. You see, I know about this. It means that it's a real kind of, you're in a
That's
real.
awesome.
But are you texting with them yet, Anna?
Oh, I was gonna suggest that. Amazing. Thank you so much. I had a question about post-sales, especially with enterprise clients, and maybe you have an implementation process, maybe it transitions to success, you have support after that. Just can you speak to how you structure these, and especially if your product is evolving and you want your customers who are already implemented and happy, but just to be getting the most of your product? Just how do you think about that, and how do you structure it today?
It's a great question. I would say that this is an area that we invest a lot in studying and improving. So I don't have a great playbook to share. I just think that eventually what I learned, that if you have a good relationship with the client on the ongoing basis, so they have like ongoing relationship calls and they feel that you care about them on the ongoing basis, this is much easier to come and present them things than just kind of, like chase them when you want to upsell them all of a second. Okay. So I think this is really kind of building their relationship. I think this is also kind of assuring that this is a long-term partnership. The majority of the cases, I think I mean, I always say that, I mean, Papaya needs to be a seamless kind of a solution, okay? I mean, we need to create quiet in the organization, but if all of a sudden you need to hire somebody tomorrow morning in, I don't know, Uzbekistan, or to terminate an employee, you need to speak with us immediately. You need to understand what's going on. But it's really great if I can call you like every quarter, and I know that you are currently kind of growing, and assure that, we can provide data for you. We can provide like hiring a kind of benchmarks for you and so on. So find the key points that where you can bring value, and this is easy for you, okay? For us, it's data, really kind of, like hiring data, benchmarks, compliance, the kind of data and so on. That's very important. And I think that when you are bringing value, I mean, people will be always kind of more perspective to kind of listen about new products and kind of cross-sell, kind of upsell and so on. Honestly, we invest as anyone else, like sending newsletters and offers and so on. I think that the ROI is zero, or very, very, very little, because nobody wants to kind of, or I think that majority of us are too busy. So it's not that we are going into kind of product updates, read it all and said, okay, this is what we want. It's very hard to get attention on basically kind of just sending kind of emails and so on. So it's need to be a real relationship.
Thank you.
Okay, let's wrap with founder mode. And this is the meme du jour right now in startup land. And I'm curious your take. You have 900 employees, right, at Papaya today. And if the way we define founder mode is the groundbreaking idea that CEOs should sometimes delegate and sometimes not delegate, which is just so profound. How do you think about the difference between where you get in the weeds and where you stay and trust your team?
It's a great question. And if you ask my team, they will tell you that I'm all over the place. So I'm definitely kind of not sure that I'm the best person to kind of ask, but I would say that generally speaking, every single quarter now, I have 2 or 3 kind of departments or processes that I know that I'm going to break completely to the details and ask tons of why and rebuild, because this is what you need to do when you're growing so quickly. And so many things sometimes are just like, doesn't make sense any longer internally, but we are still doing it because nobody asked why and nobody kind of spent the time of changing them. And I always like to kind of do those processes and get a team together and eventually kind of force them to think, force them to innovate, force them to change. I would say that I'm addicted to changes. I love changes, okay? I love to kind of challenge myself with changes. I also learned along the way that the majority of the people don't have this passion to changes as I have. So I need also to adapt my phase of changes and the ability to adapt to change to others. And I need to assure that everyone feels confident, maybe kind of to take them a bit off the grid, but not too much off the grid. So I do think that founders mode is very, very important. I do think that eventually going and reading customers' emails, customer kind of complaints, understanding that you know and you feel the business from kind of the level, kind of from really from the ground and not from the top kind of perspective is super important, because this is where you see where thing breaks, and things breaks. I mean, you know, this is the nature of things. But if you don't kind of fix them quick enough, this is where it gets messy.
But understood, but you can't be in the weeds on every single detail of the business, right? So I guess what's interesting is when you said you're all over the place, did you mean you're in the weeds in a lot of areas, or you're unpredictable to your team on where you dive deep? Because I think there's actually, I remember sitting in a prior life when I was sitting in these end of year exec offsites at LinkedIn. I remember like occasionally Jeff Weiner, then the CEO, would like seemingly randomly would start interrogating some product leader on the most minute details of their proposal. And he would know off the top of his head a lot of the underlying metrics of the product area, which kind of shocked everyone in the room. But he didn't do it all the time. And it was hard to know when the interrogation was going to happen, and it was my sense. And what that actually led to, so that unpredictability, you could argue, is a flaw, because it's like, hey, pick the area where you want to delegate, pick the area where you want to dig in the weeds. But actually, the fact that it was almost erratic seeming caused everyone to all the time be on their toes and know the metrics, because you never know when Jeff's going to ask a really detailed question about some underlying metric. So I'm curious for you, are you like all the time, always in the weeds founder mode, or are you only occasionally deep diving? And can your team predict when you choose to dive deep?
I can't answer this because then I'm going to fail myself with my techniques. No, I'm looking at that kind of in a way that I'm looking for things that does not make sense for me, okay? Like if all of a sudden I see that the team, some team, is constantly growing and the efficiency level is decreasing, I ask why. If I see that there is kind of dissatisfaction from a specific kind of process, group of clients and so on, I go and ask why. I think that if I think that something does not make sense in terms of our efficiency internally, I said, okay, let's dive and see how it works. You can't be all over the place all the time, but I do think that sometimes you learn a lot from people that are coming from the outside. So I try to spend time with actually people that are new joiners to Papaya after 2 or 3 months, because this is where they still kind of ask why. Afterwards, you get used to things, and you kind of get the bad habits of the company, and if you don't change them. And I challenge them to tell me, what's going on? How do they see it? What works well in their team? What's worked not that great? What's there from their past experience we can adopt? And I think it's not interrogation, because I think that this is aggressive. It's kind of more trying to hear them and really give them kind of the space to share. And I think they can bring a lot of knowledge. I didn't spend time in that many organizations. So if you bring people from tons of different organizations and you hire from the right places, you actually learn quite a lot.
It's a great point I hadn't thought about before, which is your newest hires are the people who are going to ask the most foundational questions about why things happen the way they happen, because they don't know any better, or they're just genuinely curious. And it is the more seasoned employees that get accustomed to the inertia of an organization. So I think it's really smart. And of course, it's harder and harder to do, I assume, as companies scale. So you're a 900 person company and you're talking to some junior person, but that's actually where you can get more insight on things on certain topics than the seasoned exec.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And yeah, appreciate your time. So many interesting takeaways for me, inclusive of this idea of playing the long game with relationships. Every relationship, there's a future, and also thinking about how to accelerate sales cycles with clear-eyed thinking and real honest reflection on the state of the pipeline and how far along the relationship actually is. So many great insights. We're honored to have you in the Village. Thank you for being an LP and backing so many of the founders on this call and listening to this podcast. So we appreciate it and look forward to crossing paths again soon.
Thank you, and let's have a great 2025.
Thank you, Villagers. Talk to everyone soon.